At its height, Rome was home to more than 1 million people, a number that would not be matched by any European city for over 1,000 years. Think about that for a moment. 1 million souls crowded into a single city, drinking from the same pipes, eating bread baked in the same public ovens, watching men die in the same arenas. A city so vast, so loud, so relentlessly alive that travelers who arrived for the first time often described a feeling close to vertigo, as if the sheer density of human ambition had bent the air itself. Rome was not just a city. It was a system, a machine built from conquest, from law, from blood and marble, from genius and breathtaking cruelty. At the peak of its power, the Roman Empire controlled roughly 5 million square kilometers of territory, stretching from the burning deserts of North Africa to the frost-locked forests of northern Britain. It governed somewhere between 50 and 90 million people, perhaps a quarter of the entire human population alive at the time. Its roads connected the known world. Its language shaped every tongue spoken in Western Europe today. Its laws echo through courtrooms on 6 continents. Its architecture still stands, still breathes, still draws crowds of millions who press their hands against stones laid 2,000 years ago and feel something they cannot quite name. This is not a story of myth. Rome does not need embellishment. What actually happened, the real rise, the real power, the real horror, is far more extraordinary than any legend. This is the Forbidden Archives. And today, we open the file on the Roman Empire. It begins on a bend in the Tiber River, in central Italy, sometime in the 8th century before the Common Era. The traditional founding date, 753 BC, was calculated centuries later by Roman scholars, most notably the writer Marcus Terentius Varro. The earliest Romans were not conquerors. They were farmers and pastoralists, clustered on 7 low hills above a river that flooded reliably and provided fresh water and a modest trade route. There was nothing inevitable about what they would become. For the first 2.5 centuries of its existence, Rome was a monarchy ruled by kings. 7 of them, according to tradition, though the historical record for these earliest rulers is tangled with myth. What we do know is that in 509 BC, the last king, Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, was expelled following a political crisis involving the rape of a noblewoman named Lucretia by his son. The Roman aristocracy, led by a man named Lucius Junius Brutus, rose up and abolished the monarchy. In its place, they established the Roman Republic. 2 elected consuls would now share supreme authority, each serving for only 1 year, each able to veto the other's decisions. It was a system designed above all else to prevent any single man from seizing absolute power, a fear that would define and eventually destroy the republic itself. The early republic was consumed by 2 struggles running simultaneously. Externally, Rome spent the next 2 centuries engaged in almost constant warfare with its neighbors, the Etruscans to the north, the Samnites in the mountains, the Latin cities surrounding it. Rome won these wars not through genius alone, but through a distinctly Roman practice. When they conquered a people, they often gave them rights, incorporated them, made them stakeholders in Roman power. A conquered enemy became a potential ally. That insight would prove transformative. Internally, the Republic was riven by the conflict between the patricians, the hereditary aristocracy, and the plebeians, the common people. This struggle, called the conflict of the orders, lasted nearly 2 centuries. Through relentless political pressure, including the extraordinary tactic of simply leaving Rome en masse, a kind of collective strike, the plebeians gradually won the right to hold office, to have their own tribunes with power to veto patrician decisions, and eventually to see their customs codified in written law. The 12 Tables, Rome's first written legal code, were published around 450 BC. For the first time, the law was not a secret held by aristocrats. It was carved in bronze and placed in the Forum for anyone to read. By the 3rd century BC, Rome controlled the Italian peninsula. But the Mediterranean world was not yet theirs. Standing between Rome and total domination of the Western Sea was the greatest commercial empire of the ancient world, Carthage. Carthage, located on the coast of modern-day Tunisia, was rich, powerful, and old. Founded by Phoenician traders, it had built a maritime empire that dominated the Western Mediterranean, controlling the sea lanes, the tin routes from Britain, the silver mines of Spain, the grain fields of Sicily. Rome and Carthage went to war 3 times. The Punic Wars, as they are known, would become among the most catastrophic conflicts the ancient world ever produced. The First Punic War began in 264 BC over Sicily. It lasted 23 years. Rome, traditionally a land power, was forced to build a navy almost from nothing. At one point, according to the historian Polybius, Roman engineers reverse-engineered a captured Carthaginian warship and began producing copies at scale. They invented a boarding device called the corvus, a spiked metal bridge that could be dropped onto an enemy deck, turning a naval battle into a land fight where Roman soldiers had the advantage. By the war's end, Rome had won Sicily, its first overseas province. But it was the Second Punic War from 218 to 201 BC that carved itself into collective memory with an almost cinematic ferocity. Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general, led an army from Spain across the Alps in winter, with war elephants, and descended into northern Italy. What followed was one of the most psychologically devastating campaigns in military history. Hannibal did not simply defeat Roman armies. He annihilated them. At the Battle of Trebia in 218 BC, at Lake Trasimene in 217 BC, and most catastrophically at Cannae in 216 BC, Hannibal destroyed Roman force after Roman force. At Cannae, approximately 70,000 Roman soldiers were killed in a single afternoon, surrounded and systematically slaughtered by a Carthaginian army half their size. It remains one of the most studied battles in military history, a model of tactical encirclement that military academies still analyze today. Rome did not surrender. That is the remarkable thing. After Cannae, with Hannibal camped in Italy and Rome's allies beginning to defect, the Senate stripped the temples of their gold, armed slaves, and kept fighting. A Roman general named Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, took the war to Spain and then to Africa itself. In 202 BC, at the Battle of Zama, Scipio defeated Hannibal on Carthaginian soil. Hannibal, who had spent 16 years ravaging Italy and never been defeated in the field, lost his one decisive battle when it mattered most. Carthage was stripped of its empire, its navy, its military independence. The Third Punic War, from 149 to 146 BC, was not really a war at all. It was an execution. Rome surrounded Carthage, besieged it for 3 years, and when the walls finally broke, Roman soldiers went street by street, killing the inhabitants or enslaving them. The city was burned. Its stones were thrown down. The ground, perhaps, was salted, though modern historians debate whether this actually occurred or became legend after the fact. What is not in doubt is that one of the great cities of the ancient world was erased. Rome now controlled the Western Mediterranean. The same year, 146 BC, Roman armies also sacked Corinth in Greece, effectively ending Greek independence. Within 50 years, Rome had gone from a regional power to the master of the Mediterranean world. But the republic that achieved this would not survive its own success. Power, when it accumulates on a large enough scale, creates its own gravity. It pulls men toward it who are willing to do things that ordinary ambition would not permit. The late Roman Republic was drowning in the consequences of its own conquests. Wealth poured in from the provinces, but it pooled at the top. Roman aristocrats bought up land with the profits of war, displacing the smallholders whose sons had fought those wars in the first place. A landless, restless urban poor accumulated in Rome. The legions began to identify more with their generals than with the Senate. The institutions that had held the Republic together were buckling. The Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, tried in the 130s and 120s BC to address the land crisis through legal reform. Both were killed by mobs organized by the Senate. Their deaths marked the first time in centuries that Romans had used political violence to resolve a domestic dispute. It would not be the last. The military reforms of the general Gaius Marius in 107 BC, opening the legions to the landless poor and equipping them at state expense, created professional armies that owed their livelihoods and loyalties to their commanders, not to the Senate. The consequences arrived with the force of physics. Lucius Cornelius Sulla, in 88 BC, did what had been unthinkable. He marched his legions on Rome itself. Not once but twice. He seized the city, published lists of his political enemies, the first proscriptions, and had them killed or driven into exile. He reformed the constitution to favor the Senate and the aristocracy, then, astonishingly, retired. Rome had survived, but its immunity to military dictatorship was gone. Into this fractured landscape strode Gaius Julius Caesar. Caesar is perhaps the most written about figure in all of ancient history, and even so, the reality of him is somehow more extraordinary than the myth. Born in 100 BC into an aristocratic family of modest means, he was by turns a hostage of pirates who demanded his ransom, and who he later had crucified after paying it. A soldier, a lawyer, a man of devastating personal charm and restless political intelligence. His debts were enormous. His ambition was larger. From 58 to 50 BC, Caesar conducted the Gallic Wars, a conquest of modern-day France, Belgium, Switzerland, and parts of Germany that cost, by his own account, the lives of 1 million Gauls and the enslavement of another million. His account of these campaigns, the Commentarii de Bello Gallico, written in the third person with a clarity and directness that still feels modern, became one of the most read texts in Latin literature. He also made 2 expeditions to Britain in 55 and 54 BC, the first Roman general to set foot on the island, though permanent conquest would have to wait nearly a century. When the Senate ordered Caesar to disband his armies and return to Rome as a private citizen, stripping him of his immunity to prosecution, he crossed the Rubicon River in January of 49 BC, the boundary beyond which Roman law forbade a general to bring armed troops. It was, as Caesar himself reportedly acknowledged, the point of no return. Civil war followed. Caesar defeated his rival Pompey and his allies. In 44 BC, he was declared Dictator Perpetuo, dictator in perpetuity. To a generation of Romans raised on the memory of Sulla, the implication was clear. On the Ides of March, the 15th of March 44 BC, Caesar was stabbed 23 times in the theater of Pompey by a group of senators calling themselves the Liberatores. His body was left where it fell for 3 hours before slaves carried it home. His assassins believed they had saved the Republic. They had destroyed it. The civil wars that followed his death lasted another 13 years and consumed nearly the entire Roman world. When they ended, it was Caesar's adopted son and heir, Octavian, who stood alone. In 27 BC, the Senate gave him the title Augustus, the revered one. The Roman Empire had begun. Augustus was, by any measure, one of the most consequential political figures in human history. He did not call himself emperor. That word, with its modern implications, did not yet exist. He called himself princeps, meaning first citizen, a careful fiction designed to preserve the outward forms of the republic while concentrating real power in his hands. He ruled for 41 years. He reformed the administration of the provinces, overhauled the tax system, created the first permanent professional army with fixed pay and terms of service, established the Praetorian Guard as his personal security force, launched an enormous program of public building. He reportedly boasted that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble, and presided over a cultural flowering that produced Virgil, Horace, Ovid, and Livy. His reign is known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, 2 centuries of relative stability and prosperity across an empire of tens of millions. He died in his bed at 75, having outlived most of his chosen successors. His last words, according to the historian Suetonius, were, "Have I played my part well? Then applaud as I exit." Not every emperor would manage such a graceful departure. Tiberius, Augustus's stepson and successor, began his reign competently but descended into a paranoid isolation on the island of Capri, leaving the administration of Rome to a Praetorian prefect named Sejanus, who used his position to conduct a reign of political terror. When Tiberius finally recognized Sejanus's ambitions and had him executed in 31 AD, the purge that followed consumed Sejanus's allies, his children, even his pre-adolescent daughter, who was technically too young to be executed under Roman law and was therefore raped by her executioner before being strangled. Tiberius died in 37 AD, smothered with a pillow, according to some ancient sources, by his successor. That successor was Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, known to history by his childhood nickname, Caligula, meaning little boot, a name given to him by his father's soldiers because he wore miniature soldiers' boots as a toddler in camp. His reign began with enormous public goodwill. He freed political prisoners, burned the records of the tax informers, put on lavish public games. Romans celebrated in the streets. Then, after approximately 6 months, something changed. Ancient sources describe a severe illness in late 37 AD from which he emerged, in the words of Suetonius and Cassius Dio, transformed. What followed, if the ancient sources are to be believed and historians continue to debate their reliability, was a 4-year reign of extraordinary capriciousness and cruelty. He reportedly had men tortured in his presence at dinner. He claimed divine status while still living, reportedly appearing at the Capitoline temple dressed as different gods. He had a bridge of boats built across the Bay of Baiae so he could ride across it in armor, supposedly to mock a prophecy that he had as much chance of becoming emperor as a horse had of crossing the bay. The ancient sources claim he made his horse, Incitatus, a consul, though most modern historians believe this, if it occurred at all, was a piece of political theater designed to humiliate the Senate rather than genuine madness. He was assassinated by members of the Praetorian Guard in January of 41 AD, stabbed 30 times in a palace corridor. He was 28 years old. His uncle Claudius, found hiding behind a curtain in the palace during the chaos of the assassination, was declared emperor by the Praetorian Guard, the first time the army had openly decided who would rule Rome. Claudius proved a surprisingly effective administrator. He expanded the bureaucracy, conducted the successful invasion and annexation of Britain in 43 AD, and oversaw significant legal and civil reforms. He was also dominated by a series of powerful wives and freedmen, which the Roman aristocracy never forgave him for. He died in 54 AD, almost certainly poisoned, likely by his 4th wife, Agrippina the Younger, using mushrooms, so that her son by a previous marriage could take the throne. That son was Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, better known as Nero. Nero is one of the most complex and difficult figures in Roman history, and one of the most misrepresented. He was 17 when he became emperor. For the first 5 years of his reign, the Quinquennium Neronis, praised even by later critics, he governed well, largely under the influence of his tutor, the philosopher Seneca, and the Praetorian prefect Burrus. He reduced taxes. He gave the Senate greater authority. He showed personal clemency that was, For a Roman emperor, remarkable. Then the restraints began to come off. In 59 AD, Nero had his own mother, Agrippina, killed, first attempting to drown her in a rigged boat, and when she swam to shore, sending assassins to finish the task. He divorced and later executed his first wife, Octavia, in order to marry his mistress, Poppaea Sabina. Ancient sources, hostile to Nero, claim he kicked Poppaea to death when she was pregnant, though this cannot be verified. He put on public performances as a singer and charioteer, activities Romans considered degradingly unworthy of an emperor, and forced audiences to sit through them under pain of penalty. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD burned for 6 days and destroyed or damaged 10 of Rome's 14 administrative districts. Whether Nero started it, the famous story of him fiddling while Rome burned is almost certainly false, since the fiddle did not exist and Nero was reportedly at Antium when the fire broke out. We cannot know. What is documented is that he used the cleared land to build his extraordinary Domus Aurea, or Golden House, a palace complex of staggering extravagance that reportedly covered over 100 hectares in the center of the city. Romans were furious. Nero blamed the Christians for the fire, initiating the first recorded Roman persecution of Christianity. He was overthrown in 68 AD when his generals and the Senate turned against him. Facing execution, he fled and killed himself, reportedly saying, "What an artist dies in me." While emperors rose and fell, Rome built. The Roman aqueduct system remains one of the greatest engineering achievements in human history. By the 4th century AD, 11 major aqueducts supplied Rome with an estimated 1 million cubic meters of water per day, more fresh water per capita than many modern cities. This water fed not only drinking fountains and private homes but the extraordinary public baths, the thermae, which were among the defining institutions of Roman urban life. The baths of Caracalla, completed in 216 AD, could accommodate 1,600 bathers simultaneously. They included not just bathing facilities but libraries, art galleries, meeting rooms, and exercise grounds, a civic center of almost incomprehensible scale. Admission was free or nearly free. The baths were open to men and women, slaves, and free citizens. In a world without public health infrastructure as we understand it, they represented a genuine Roman commitment to urban communal life. The Roman road network stretched, at its maximum extent, to over 400,000 kilometers, 80,000 kilometers of which were paved with stone. Built by legions as both military infrastructure and economic arteries, Roman roads were constructed with a sophistication that was not matched in Europe until the 18th century. They were cambered, slightly raised at the center, to allow rainwater to drain. They were built in layers, a foundation of large stones, then smaller rubble, then a surface of fitted stone polygons. Many survive to this day, still in use after 2,000 years. The Colosseum, formerly known as the Flavian Amphitheater, was constructed between 70 and 80 AD under the emperors Vespasian and Titus. It held between 50,000 and 80,000 spectators. Its engineering innovations, including a complex system of numbered entrances, corridors, and staircases designed to allow it to fill and empty in minutes, influenced stadium design for 2 millennia. Beneath the arena floor lay a network of tunnels and chambers, the hypogeum, through which animals, gladiators, and set pieces could be raised by elevator to the arena above. The gladiatorial games held there were not simply entertainment. They were profoundly political. An emperor's generosity, the number of shows he provided, the quality of gladiators, the number of animals killed, was a direct metric of his relationship with the Roman people. To win the crowd was to consolidate power. Julius Caesar once held games featuring 400 pairs of gladiators. Emperors competed to outdo their predecessors. The gladiators themselves occupy a peculiar place in Roman life. Most were slaves, prisoners of war, or condemned criminals. A small number were volunteers, drawn by the possibility of fame, prize money, and the complex celebrity that successful fighters achieved. Graffiti from Pompeii shows gladiators described in terms more associated with modern pop stars. records of their victories, their appearance, their appeal to women. A few became genuinely wealthy and famous. Many died young. For the ordinary Roman, daily life revolved around the insulae, apartment blocks, most of which were multi-story, poorly constructed, and prone to fire and collapse. The poor lived at the top, the wealthy at the bottom, where the air was better and the danger of structural failure less immediate. The streets of Rome were narrow, filthy, and extraordinarily noisy. Wheeled vehicles were banned from the city center during daylight hours to prevent gridlock, so deliveries happened at night, filling the streets with the creak and rumble of carts. The satirist Juvenal complained that the noise made sleep impossible. Food for the urban poor came primarily from the state grain dole, the annona, which provided free or subsidized grain to several 100,000 Roman citizens. Bread was baked in commercial bakeries, of which Pompeii alone had dozens. The Roman diet, at every social level, was heavily based on grain, olive oil, wine, and vegetables. Meat was expensive and eaten less frequently than modern people often assume. The garum sauce made from fermented fish, found in nearly every Roman recipe that survives, was the universal condiment, as ubiquitous as salt. At the opposite extreme of the empire, Trajan's conquest of Dacia, modern Romania, between 101 and 106 AD brought Rome its last major territorial expansion. The wealth stripped from Dacian gold and silver mines funded the extraordinary building program that gave Rome Trajan's Column, Trajan's Market, and Trajan's Forum. The column, 100 meters tall, is covered in a continuous spiral bas-relief depicting the Dacian campaigns, an ancient newsreel, still readable today, showing Roman soldiers building bridges, receiving ambassadors, and fighting in conditions that make the work feel immediate even across 2 millennia. The world did not go dark overnight. It changed, slowly over generations. Latin continued to be spoken. Roman law continued to be applied. Churches occupied Roman temples. The roads kept carrying traffic. But the thing that had been Rome, the thing that had organized a quarter of humanity under a single administrative system, that had built the aqueducts and the roads and the arenas, that had generated the law and the language and the literature, that was gone.